My name is Chloe. For 28 years, I have lived in the shadow of a professional victim. My younger sister, Madison, is a woman who treats life like a Broadway stage where she is perpetually the tragic, misunderstood lead, and the rest of us are merely extras meant to applaud her suffering. If there was a family vacation, Madison would inevitably develop a mysterious, undiagnosable migraine that required us to stay in the hotel. If it was my high school graduation, Madison would suffer a severe panic attack that forced my parents to leave the ceremony early. She was the golden child not because she achieved great things, but because she demanded a level of care and attention that exhausted everyone around her into submission. My parents, bless their naive hearts, enabled her. She's fragile, Chloe, my mother would sigh, handing Madison her third iced latte of the day. You're the strong one. You have to understand. I understood all right. I understood that Madison was a narcissist. But I never, in my darkest nightmares, imagined she was capable of what she did last year. I thought she was just an attention seeker. I didn't realize she was a sociopath. The nightmare began on a Sunday in late October. My parents had called a mandatory family dinner. When I arrived at their house, the atmosphere was suffocatingly grim. My mother's eyes were bloodshot. My father was staring blankly at his untouched pot roast. Sitting at the center of the table, looking pale and clutching the hand of her bewildered fiancé, Greg, was Madison. Chloe, my mother choked out, covering her mouth with a trembling hand. It's Madison. We have some terrible news. Madison looked down at her lap, letting a single perfect tear roll down her cheek. I'm sick, Chloe, she whispered, her voice frail and raspy. I've been having tests done for the last month. The doctors, they found a mass. My heart, despite years of resentment, dropped into my stomach. Cancer is the great equalizer. It doesn't care if you're a good person or a manipulative one. What do you mean? I asked, my voice barely audible. What kind of mass? It's acute myeloid leukemia, Madison said, sniffing delicately. And it's aggressive. Stage 4. It's in my bone marrow. The oncologist said it's one of the worst cases he's ever seen in someone my age. My mother burst into loud, wrenching sobs. Greg pulled Madison into his chest, burying his face in her hair. My father reached across the table and grabbed her hand, looking like he had aged 10 years in a matter of seconds. I sat there, stunned. AML. I repeated. Madison, oh my God. What is the treatment plan? When do you start chemotherapy? That's the hardest part, Madison said, looking up with large, watery eyes. The standard chemo won't work for my specific genetic mutation. My doctor says my only real hope is an experimental immunotherapy and targeted stem cell transplant program. But it's not covered by insurance. It's a specialized clinic in Switzerland. It's going to cost upwards of $150,000 just to get in the door. We're going to remortgage the house, my father said immediately, his voice thick with resolve. We'll pull from my 401k. We will get you that money, sweetheart. You are not going to die. No, Daddy, I can't let you do that, Madison cried, playing the selfless martyr perfectly. I'll start a fundraiser. Greg said he'd help me set up a GoFundMe. I don't want to bankrupt my family. And just like that, the machine was set in motion. Within 48 hours, the GoFundMe page was live. The title was a masterclass in emotional manipulation. Help Madison fight the unthinkable, a bride's battle for her life. It featured a black and white photo of Madison looking wistfully out a window, wrapped in a hospital blanket. The text detailed her harrowing diagnosis, her dreams of marrying Greg, and her desperate plea for a chance to live. The response was explosive. Madison was a social butterfly. She had thousands of followers across Instagram and TikTok. Her friends shared it. Local businesses shared it. Even our high school alumni association sent out a mass email. Within a week, the campaign had raised $40,000. My parents, despite Madison's protests, drained their savings account to donate $20,000 anonymously. Greg sold his beloved vintage Mustang to add another $15,000. People were hosting bake sales. A local news station did a 3-minute segment on her. Madison was officially a local celebrity, a tragic, brave warrior. But as the weeks turned into a month and the donations crossed the $80,000 mark, the analytical side of my brain, I work as a data analyst for a health insurance firm, began to itch. Things weren't adding up. First, it was her appearance. Madison claimed she was undergoing pre-treatment aggressive oral chemotherapy to stabilize her white blood cell count before Switzerland. She dramatically shaved her head on a TikTok live stream that garnered 2 million views. But while she was bald, she didn't look sick. Her skin was glowing. She hadn't lost a pound. Her eyebrows and eyelashes, which usually fall out with aggressive chemo, were miraculously perfect. I later realized she had gotten them expensively microbladed right before the diagnosis. Then there were the hospital visits. Madison refused to let anyone accompany her to her oncology appointments. She claimed the cancer center had strict COVID-19 and immunocompromised protocols that prohibited guests. Greg would drop her off at the entrance of the massive St. Jude Memorial Hospital, and she would call him to pick her up 3 hours later. But the biggest red flag came during a family dinner at her apartment. Madison was supposedly suffering from severe nausea and a compromised immune system. Yet I watched her casually eat a spicy tuna sushi roll. Raw fish is a massive, life-threatening no-no for anyone with 0 white blood cells, and wash it down with a glass of Pinot Grigio. Should you be drinking alcohol with your meds? I asked casually, keeping my face neutral. Madison stiffened. My oncologist said 1 glass of wine is fine, Chloe. It helps with the anxiety. Stop policing my trauma. My mother immediately jumped to her defense. Leave her alone, Chloe. She's fighting for her life. If she wants a glass of wine, let her have it. I dropped the subject. But the seed of doubt had blossomed into a terrifying, ugly suspicion. What if my sister, the girl who faked a broken ankle to get out of a math final, was faking a terminal illness to fund a luxurious lifestyle? I needed proof. The opportunity presented itself 2 days later. Madison had asked me to come over to feed her cat while she and Greg were doing an interview with a local podcast about her journey. She left her apartment keys under the mat. I went in, fed the cat, and then walked straight into her home office. I felt a pang of guilt. A brief, fleeting moment where I thought, what if I'm wrong? What if she really is dying and I'm just a paranoid, jealous sister? But the rational part of my brain pushed the guilt aside. I opened her laptop. She had carelessly left it in sleep mode without a password lock. I went straight to her downloads folder. I searched for lab results, oncology, pathology. Nothing. I opened her web browser history. There were no searches for AML survival rates or chemotherapy side effects. Instead, there were searches for * how to make a bald cap look realistic. * can you buy hospital wristbands on Amazon? * luxury chalets in the Swiss Alps. * how to transfer GoFundMe money to an offshore account. My blood turned to ice. My hands began to shake as I clicked through the history. I found the website where she had purchased fake medical letterheads. I found the stock image website where she had downloaded the picture of the Ford drip she had posted on her Instagram story. But I needed the smoking gun. I opened her email. There was an email sent to herself with an attachment titled Diagnosis under docs. I opened it. It was the letter she had shown my parents to prove her diagnosis. It was printed on the letterhead of Dr. Eris Thorne, a prominent oncologist at St. Jude Memorial. The letter stated she had stage 4 AML. But because it was a Word document, I could see the editing history. She had downloaded a template of a generic doctor's note, copy-pasted Dr. Thorne's logo from Google Images, and typed the diagnosis herself. She had even misspelled myeloid as myeloid in the second paragraph, a mistake a world-class oncologist would never make. She wasn't dying. She was stealing. She had stolen $95,000 from strangers. She had stolen my parents' retirement. She had stolen Greg's savings. He was a monster. I sat in her ergonomic desk chair, staring at the screen, trying to process the magnitude of the betrayal. My parents were crying themselves to sleep every night. My mother had started taking antidepressants to cope with the impending loss of her daughter. And Madison was using their agony to fund a lavish European vacation. I took out my phone and took pictures of everything. The search history, the forged Word document, the Amazon receipts for the hospital wristbands. I emailed the files to my secure work address. Then I closed the laptop, fed the cat one more treat, and walked out of the apartment. I didn't call my parents. If I told them now, without an undeniable authoritative voice backing me up, Madison would twist it. She would cry. She would say I hacked her to frame her because I was jealous of the attention. My parents would believe her. They wanted to believe her. I needed a professional. I needed a nuke. I called Julian. Dr. Julian Vance was my best friend from college. He also happened to be a chief resident of oncology at a rival hospital across the city. He was a brilliant, no-nonsense doctor who spent his days fighting to save the lives of people who were actually dying. I drove straight to his apartment. When he opened the door, seeing the pale, haunted look on my face, he immediately ushered me in. Chloe, what's wrong? Is it your parents? No, I said, my voice trembling. It's Madison. I sat at his kitchen table and laid my phone down. I showed him the photos. I showed him the forged letterhead. I showed him the GoFundMe updates. Julian read through the materials in total silence. As a doctor, his face was trained to remain impassive, but I could see the vein in his temple pulsing. I could see the quiet, terrifying rage building in his eyes. To me, this was a familial betrayal. To Julian, this was a desecration of the very disease that he watched tear real families apart every single day. When he finished, he set the phone down. This is a forgery, Julian said, his voice deadly calm. And a sloppy one. The staging terminology is entirely wrong for AML. The chemotherapy protocol she claims to be on doesn't exist. She listed oral doxorubicin. Doxorubicin is in 4-vesicant. If you took it orally, it would burn a hole through your stomach. So she's 100% faking it, I whispered, the reality finally truly sinking in. She doesn't have cancer, Chloe, Julian said, looking me dead in the eye. She has a severe personality disorder and a talent for wire fraud. This is a felony. Over $100,000 across state lines via GoFundMe? The FBI investigates these kinds of scams. If I go to the police now, she'll delete everything, I said, pacing his kitchen. She'll claim she was misdiagnosed. She'll play the victim again. I want her exposed. I want my parents to see exactly who she is, in a way she can never ever deny. Julian leaned back against his counter, crossing his arms. A slow, dark realization crept over his features. When is she supposed to leave for Switzerland? She isn't, I said, checking the latest update on her page. My stomach churned as I read it out loud. She just posted this an hour ago. Devastating news, my prayer warriors. The cancer has spread to my brain. The doctors say Switzerland won't be able to save me anymore. I am officially terminal. Instead of treatment, I am using the funds to host a grand celebration of life/farewell party next weekend. I want to see all your beautiful faces one last time while I am still strong enough to stand. Any remaining funds will be left to my amazing fiancé, Greg, to help him rebuild his life without me. Julian scoffed, a harsh sound of pure disgust. A farewell party. She's cashing out. She's going to take the money, throw a party for her own ego, and then probably fake a miraculous remission a month later. Or she'll fake her death and move to a beach in Mexico, I muttered. I looked at Julian. The party is next Saturday. At the Grand Plaza Hotel. She rented the ballroom. 200 people are coming. Everyone who donated. The local news anchor who interviewed her is going to be there. Julian looked at me and I saw the exact moment the oncologist turned into an executioner. Chloe, he said softly, are you willing to burn your family dynamic to the ground to stop her? She burned it to the ground the day she watched my dad cry over a forged piece of paper, I replied. I don't just want to stop her, Julian. I want to obliterate her. Good, Julian said, walking over to his desk and grabbing his medical credentials ID badge. Because I have a colleague who works at St. Jude Memorial. I'm going to make a few phone calls to secure the legal confirmation that she has never been a patient there. And next Saturday, I'm going to be your +1. The day of the farewell. Saturday arrived with a sickening sense of dread and adrenaline. The Grand Plaza Hotel ballroom was decorated like a bizarre cross between a wedding and a funeral. There were massive floral arrangements of white lilies. A slideshow of Madison's life, heavy on the sick photos of her in headscarves looking frail, was projected onto a massive screen. Over 200 people were there. Greg's family, our extended relatives, high school friends, local charity organizers. Everyone was dressed in somber colors, dabbing their eyes with tissues, whispering about how brave and beautiful Madison was. My parents were sitting at the front table looking utterly broken. My father was holding my mother, who was softly weeping into a napkin. It took every ounce of self-control I possessed not to run to them and tell them the truth right then and there. But I needed the audience. I needed the trap to snap shut in front of everyone so Madison could never spin the narrative again. At 7:30 p.m. the lights dimmed. A spotlight hit the grand staircase. There she was. Madison. She was wearing a flowing ethereal white gown. Her head was wrapped in a silk scarf. She walked slowly, leaning heavily on Greg's arm, portraying the tragic dying heroine with Oscar-worthy precision. The crowd erupted into a standing ovation. People were openly sobbing. She reached the stage and took the microphone. Greg kissed her cheek, tears streaming down his face, and stepped back. "Thank you," Madison whispered into the mic. The sound system amplified her fake, raspy frailty. "Thank you all for coming. When Dr. Thorne told me I only had a few weeks left, I was angry. I was terrified." He paused, letting a strategic tear fall. "But looking out at all of you, seeing the $110,000 we raised together, I realize I am not dying in vain. I am surrounded by love." I was standing at the back of the ballroom, hidden in the shadows near the heavy mahogany double doors. Beside me stood Dr. Julian Vance. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was wearing his crisp white hospital coat, his chief resident badge gleaming under the ambient light. In his hand he held a thick manila folder containing the undeniable, legally obtained proof of her medical fraud, alongside the printed photos of her Google searches and forged documents. "She's really milking it," Julian whispered, his voice laced with venom. "Let her finish her sentence," I replied, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would crack my ribs. "Let her claim the money." On stage, Madison looked at Greg. "I wish I could have been your wife, Greg. But I know this money will help you start a foundation in my name. To everyone here, thank you. This is my final goodbye." The crowd sniffled. The tragic silence hung in the air, heavy and absolute. I looked at Julian. I nodded. Julian pushed the heavy mahogany double doors open with a loud, resounding crack that echoed through the silent ballroom. Every single head in the room turned toward the back. Madison froze on stage, the microphone hovering near her lips. My parents turned around in their chairs. I stepped out of the shadows, walking side by side with the doctor in the white coat. We didn't walk slowly. We walked with purpose, marching straight down the center aisle directly toward the stage. "Chloe," my mother whispered as I passed her table. "What are you doing? Who is that?" I didn't answer her. I kept my eyes locked on my sister. Madison's pale, tragic expression faltered. For the first time in her life, I saw genuine, unadulterated terror flash in her eyes. She recognized Julian. She knew what a real oncologist looked like. Julian stopped at the base of the stage. He looked up at the girl in the white dress. "Madison Vance." Julian's voice boomed across the silent room, requiring no microphone to command absolute authority.
The silence in the Grand Plaza Hotel ballroom was absolute. It wasn't the respectful, mournful silence from a moment ago. It was the suffocating, heavy silence of a room holding its collective breath. Over 200 people stared at the stage. Greg stepped in front of Madison. His face flushed with protective anger. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded, pointing a shaking finger at Julian. "My fiancé is dying. Have some respect and get out." Julian didn't flinch. He walked up the 3 carpeted steps onto the stage, his white coat catching the glare of the spotlight. I followed closely behind him, my eyes locked on my parents in the front row. My father had stood up, his face a mask of utter confusion. My mother was clutching her napkin to her chest. "Respect is earned, sir," Julian said, his voice projecting clearly across the ballroom. He stopped 5 feet from Greg and Madison. "It is not extorted through emotional manipulation and wire fraud." Madison's hands were trembling. The frail, raspy cancer voice she had been using all night completely vanished. "Chloe, what is this?" she hissed, her voice sharp and panicked. "Are you out of your mind? You're ruining my farewell." "No, Madison," I said, stepping up to the microphone stand and pulling it out of its holder. I turned to face the crowd. My heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, but my hands were entirely steady. "I'm not ruining your farewell. I'm just giving it some factual accuracy." A murmur rippled through the crowd. The local news anchor, who had been sitting at a VIP table, suddenly sat up straighter, pulling out her smartphone to record. Julian opened the thick manila folder in his hands. He looked at Madison with the cold, clinical detachment of a surgeon examining a tumor. "Madison Vance," Julian began, his voice ringing out. "You claim to have stage 4 acute myeloid leukemia, with a rare genetic mutation requiring experimental immunotherapy in Switzerland. You also claim to have been undergoing aggressive pre-treatment oral chemotherapy to stabilize your white blood cell count." "I do," Madison cried, fresh tears springing to her eyes. She looked at the crowd, playing the victim. "Look at him. He's harassing a dying woman. Greg, make them leave." Greg took a step forward, But Julian held up a single sheet of paper. "This," Julian said, holding the paper high so the front rows could see, "is the diagnosis letter you posted to your GoFundMe page. It is printed on the official letterhead of St. Jude Memorial Hospital, signed by Dr. Eris Thorne, the head of oncology." "That's my doctor," Madison shrieked. "That's fascinating," Julian replied, his voice dropping to a deadly quiet register. "Because Dr. Eris Thorne was my attending mentor during my residency. I stood next to him at a medical conference 3 days ago. I showed him this letter. He has never met you. You are not in the St. Jude system. You have never been a patient there." The collective gasp from the ballroom sounded like a vacuum sealing. "That's a lie," Madison screamed, taking a step back. She looked at Greg, her eyes wide with frantic desperation. "Greg, baby, they're lying. They're trying to steal the donation money." "Are we?" Julian asked, pulling out another document. "Let's look at the medical claims in this letter. You listed your primary medication as oral doxorubicin. Doxorubicin is a highly toxic intravenous vesicant, colloquially known in the oncology ward as the Red Devil. If you ingested it orally, as you claim, it would have burned a hole through your esophagus and stomach lining within hours. You would be in an ICU, not wearing a silk scarf at the Grand Plaza." Greg froze. He looked at Julian, then slowly turned his head to look at Madison. "Maddie," he whispered, his voice cracking. "What is he talking about?" "Furthermore," Julian continued relentlessly, "you misspelled myeloid in your own forged diagnosis. You spelled it my. A world-class oncologist does not misspell his own specialty." My father pushed past his chair and walked to the edge of the stage. His face was gray. "Chloe," he said, his voice trembling. "Chloe, what is he saying? Tell me this is a mistake." I looked down at my father. The man who had drained his retirement account. The man who had wept in my arms just weeks ago. It broke my heart, but the bone had to be reset. "It's not a mistake, Dad," I said softly into the microphone. I pulled my phone from my pocket. 2 days ago, I went to feed Madison's cat. I opened her laptop. She left her browser history open. I turned to the AV technician at the back of the room, a guy I had slipped $50 to earlier that evening. "Switch the input to my phone, please." The massive projector screen behind Madison, which had previously been showing a slideshow of her tragic journey, flickered. Suddenly, my phone screen was mirrored on the 20-foot display for 200 people to see. I opened the photo album titled The Truth. "This is Madison's search history from the week before her diagnosis," I announced, swiping to the first photo. The crowd stared in horrified silence at the massive text on the screen. Search. How to make a bald cap look realistic. Search. Symptoms of leukemia easy to fake. Search. Can you buy hospital wristbands on Amazon? My mother let out a sound, a guttural, agonizing wail of sheer disbelief. She collapsed into her chair, covering her face. I swiped to the next photo. It was the editing history of the Word document on her computer. "This is the template she downloaded to forge Dr. Thorne's signature," I said. I swiped again. Search. Luxury chalets in the Swiss Alps. Search. How to transfer GoFundMe money to an offshore account. "She doesn't have cancer, Mom. She doesn't have a tumor," I said, my voice echoing through the silent, stunned room. "She microbladed her eyebrows, bought a bald cap, and forged a document to steal $110,000 from everyone in this room so she could go on a permanent luxury vacation." Pandemonium erupted. It wasn't just murmurs anymore. It was pure, unadulterated outrage. Chairs scraped against the floor. People were standing up, shouting. "You stole from us!" a woman in the back screamed. It was Mrs. Gable, the local bakery owner who had hosted a fundraiser that brought in $5,000. "My daughter emptied her piggy bank for you," a man yelled, his face purple with rage. On stage, the illusion shattered completely. Greg, the loving fiancé who had sold his prized vintage car to save her life, looked at the screen, and then at Madison. He looked like he was going to be sick. "You!" Greg choked out, taking a step away from her as if she were radioactive. "You let me sell my car. You let me cry myself to sleep every night holding you." "Greg, please, I can explain," Madison cried, reaching for him. But there was no raspy cancer voice anymore. It was her normal, high-pitched, whiny tone. She reached up and, in her panic, grabbed her silk headscarf. Slip. Underneath the scarf, the edge of a high-quality, theatrical silicone bald cap was visible, blending into her forehead. And beneath the transparent edge of the cap, you could see her thick, dark hair tightly braided against her scalp. Greg stared at her hairline. "Don't touch me," he whispered. He turned his back on her, walked off the stage, and walked straight out of the ballroom without looking back. Madison was completely exposed. The golden child was standing under the harsh glare of the spotlight, surrounded by 200 people who realized they had been conned by a sociopath. She turned to me, her face twisting into a mask of pure venom. "You bitch," she screamed, lunging toward me. "You've always been jealous of me. You ruined my life." Julian stepped smoothly between us, holding his ground. "Your life was ruined the moment you decided to use a terminal illness as a GoFundMe scam, Miss Vance." "Chloe, do something," Madison shrieked, looking down at our parents. "Mom, she hacked me. It's a setup." My father stood frozen. He looked at the screen, then at the bald cap peeling off his daughter's head, and finally at me. He didn't say a word. He just slowly turned around, helped my sobbing mother to her feet, and guided her toward the exit. They didn't look at Madison. They didn't look back. That was the moment Madison truly died to them. "Where are they going?" Madison panicked, her eyes darting around the room as the crowd began to close in, shouting demands for their money back. "Mom! Dad!" Suddenly, the heavy mahogany doors at the back of the ballroom swung open again. This time it wasn't a doctor. 4 uniformed police officers and 2 men in plainclothes suits stepped into the room. The crowd parted for them instantly. I lowered the microphone. I looked at my sister, who was now trembling with genuine, authentic fear. "Did you think I just brought a doctor, Madison?" I asked softly. Wire fraud across state lines in excess of $100,000 is a federal offense. I didn't just call Julian. I called the FBI field office. The 2 plainclothes detectives walked up the stairs to the stage. "Madison Vance?" the lead detective asked, flashing his badge. I didn't do anything," Madison stammered, backing away until she hit the projection screen. "It was a misunderstanding. I'm going to give the money back." "You have the right to remain silent," the detective said, grabbing her arm and twisting it behind her back. The loud click of the handcuffs echoed over the angry shouts of the crowd. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You are under arrest for grand larceny by deception, forgery, and federal wire fraud." They marched her off the stage. Madison was sobbing hysterically, real tears this time. She looked desperately at the crowd, begging for sympathy, but she found none. The local news anchor was standing on a chair, recording her tragic heroine being led away in handcuffs, the silicone bald cap flapping pathetically against her ear. I stood on the stage, watching her go. Julian placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "It's over, Chloe," he said quietly. "No," I replied, watching the red and blue police lights reflect against the ballroom windows. "It's just beginning. But at least the truth is out. The fallout and final justice." The aftermath was a media circus. The local news station ran the story the next morning. The headline read, "The Terminal Grifter. Bride-to-be fake stage 4 cancer for $110,000 GoFundMe." It went national within 48 hours. Madison's face, both the fake sick photo and her tear-streaked mugshot, was plastered across every screen in the country. Because the fraud was so heavily documented and publicized, GoFundMe stepped in immediately. Under their GoFundMe guarantee, they froze Madison's linked bank accounts before she could transfer a single dime offshore. Every single donor, including my parents and Greg, received a full 100% refund within 2 weeks. Greg moved out of their shared apartment the night of the party. He packed her belongings into garbage bags, left them in the hallway, and changed his number. I heard through mutual friends that he used his refunded money to buy back his vintage Mustang. My parents were broken. For months they barely left their house. The shame of what their golden child had done paralyzed them. It took a long time and intensive family therapy for them to accept that Madison's actions were not a reflection of their parenting, but a manifestation of her own deep, sociopathic narcissism. My father eventually apologized to me for enabling her all those years. "We fed the monster, Chloe," he told me, his voice thick with regret. "And it almost ate us alive." As for Madison, the justice system was not as forgiving as my parents used to be. Facing federal wire fraud charges, forgery, and grand larceny, her public defender advised her to take a plea deal. The evidence, the search history, the forged documents, the theatrical makeup receipts, was insurmountable. Madison pleaded guilty to 2 counts of federal wire fraud and 1 count of forgery. She stood in the courtroom, her natural hair grown out, looking small and ordinary in her beige jumpsuit. She tried to cry for the judge. She tried to say she suffered from a psychological compulsion for attention. The judge, a stern man who had lost his own wife to breast cancer 5 years prior, was utterly unmoved. "Miss Vance," the judge said, his voice dripping with contempt, "you weaponized the empathy of your community. You stole from people who were genuinely trying to save your life. You made a mockery of a disease that destroys millions of families. There is no psychological excuse for the calculated, malicious greed you displayed." The sentence: 48 months, 4 years, in a federal correctional institution. Following her release, she will serve 3 years of supervised probation. She is permanently banned from operating any crowdfunding campaigns or holding a fiduciary position. She is currently serving her time in a federal facility in Danbury, Connecticut. I don't visit her. I don't put money in her commissary account. My parents, despite their broken hearts, have also maintained a strict no-contact rule. Sometimes people ask me if I feel guilty. They ask if humiliating her in front of 200 people was too harsh. They ask if I could have handled it privately. My answer is always the same. A cancer like Madison doesn't respond to gentle treatment. You can't ask it politely to leave. You have to expose it to the light, cut it out at the root, and burn the edges so it can never ever grow back. I saved my family from bankruptcy. I saved Greg from marrying a monster. And I ensured that my sister will never use another person's empathy as a weapon again. I'm 30 years old now. I still work as a data analyst. I still drink coffee with Dr. Julian Vance on Sunday mornings. And for the first time in my life, I am living without a shadow.